Chapter 9. City of Smoke and Steel. Beneath the glass horizon. Neon Harbor did not rise from the horizon, it uncoiled from it. After weeks of walking, the desert finally gave way to cracked stone, then broken pavement, then a web of rusted metal bridges stretching like ribs across the coastline. Smog wrapped the distant skyline in a choking grey veil. The closer Kai and Mira drew, the more the air thickened, heavy with engine fumes, rotting food, and the metallic tang of waste runoff that fed the lower slums. It was not a city. It was a living organism, huge, wounded, and starving. Migrants flooded toward its gates, sprawling across a wide expanse of broken concrete. Lines formed without order. People pushed, pleaded, collapsed. Security drones hovered above like steel insects, scanning for weapons, fevers, and forged ID patches. Kai tightened his grip on his father, whose breathing had grown shallow and irregular. Mira stood beside him, the soil jar strapped inside her pack, her face pale from exhaustion but her posture steady. When they reached the first checkpoint, a guard in reflective armor barked, "Prove work skill or move to the outer encampment." Kai raised his chin. Field labor. Solar maintenance. Structural repair. The guard scanned him. A flicker of green lit the visor. Temporary manual work authorized. Slot placement pending. Mira stepped forward. "Domestic work," she said, her voice a soft rasp. "Greenhouse experience." The scanner pulsed red. "Mod tier servant classification," the guard read. "City quota is full. Redirect to outer zone." Mira lowered her head, accepting the blow without flinching. Kai stepped forward. "She's with me." The guard didn't look up. Outer zone. Kai's muscles tightened. He fought the urge to argue. The guards weren't men, they were the city's teeth. "You didn't provoke teeth." He bowed his head. "Outer zone," he echoed. The outer zone clung to the edges of Neon Harbor like a swarm of desperate hands. Makeshift shelters crowded every scrap of space beneath the bridges and rail lines. Smoke from burning scrap fires curled through the air, mixing with the city's smog until breathing felt like pulling rust into your lungs. Kai found a narrow patch of ground beneath a tilted steel beam, just wide enough for their blankets. Mira lowered the old man gently, her touch tender but efficient. He coughed, gasping. "I can't live in this." "Just until we find work," Kai whispered. But even as he said it, his eyes drifted to the towering sprawl of buildings beyond the barricades. Steel skeletons rising into the haze. Millions of people already inside, millions more pressing to enter. Finding work here would not be easy. As night fell, the outer zone came alive with hunger. Children darted between tents, scavenging scraps. Traders shouted prices for stale protein bars. Men watched from shadows with hollow, predatory eyes. Mira clutched the soil jar close, shielding it beneath her blanket. Kai touched her arm. "Keep it hidden. Someone will steal it." She nodded, a small tremor passing through her fingers. By morning, the air vibrated with noise, engines, machinery, shouting, coughing, the dull clang of metal. The sun could barely pierce the thick haze. Kai stood and adjusted the straps of the cart he had rented from a migrant broker. A heavy wooden rickshaw, patched together with bolts and rope. To eat, he needed credits. To get credits, he needed to pull. Mira tried to stand with him. "Let me come." "Rest," Kai said. "Watch my father." "I can work." "Mira, please." The word please froze her. So rarely used. So rarely meant for her. Finally, she nodded. Kai pulled the cart into the main road, merging with dozens of other men hauling crates, passengers, and bedridden relatives. His arms burned. His back screamed. Neon Harbor sloped sharply upward, and every incline felt like a mountain made of heat and metal. He passed vendors selling spoiled fruit, beggars shaking cracked cups, and citizens wrapped in filtered masks who recoiled at the sight of migrants. Giant screens glowed overhead, displaying news about the collapsed Alios array. Regional power grid failure expected to last several years. Food shortages spreading across coastal sectors. Aid prioritized for registered city residents. Kai pushed harder. He had no time to absorb fear. Fear didn't feed anyone. Hours passed. His body became a machine of pain and movement. He earned a handful of credits, barely enough to buy a pouch of water and a small bag of street grains. When he returned to the outer zone at dusk, Mira was kneeling in the dust outside their blankets. Her hands cupped toward a broken tin bowl. Her mouth was moving. Kai stopped. She was begging. A few coins lay in the bowl, far less than he had earned, but enough to mean she had been ignored dozens of times. Mira's hair clung to her cheeks. Sweat and soot streaked her clothing. Her posture was humble, practiced, as though she had done this before, long ago, in another life. Something inside Kai twisted sharply. "Mira," he said, trying to keep his voice from cracking. She looked up. Her eyes were not ashamed, only tired. "You needed food," she said softly. "I tried to help." Kai went to her quickly, lifting her to her feet. She swayed, her legs trembling with fatigue. He pulled her close without thinking, feeling how light she had become. "You shouldn't." His voice died in his throat. "You shouldn't have to do this." She blinked, confused by his emotion. "It is work," she said quietly. "Just another kind." Kai looked at her hands, small, chafed, trembling. He thought of the soil jar she kept hidden under their blankets. He thought of how she had nurtured seedlings with tenderness, then begged strangers with the same patience. He felt something burn beneath his ribs, anger at this place, at the world, at himself. He vowed, right then, that he would not let the city break her. They returned to their blankets. The old man ate slowly from the bag of grains. Mira shared her portion with him without hesitation. Kai watched her in the dim haze of the outer zone fires. Her face was thin, her cheeks hollow, but her eyes still held that quiet steadiness. She had survived worse than deserts, worse than famines, worse than the cruelty of people with power. Tomorrow, he would pull the rickshaw again. Mira would find small ways to bring them a little more. They would endure. But as the night deepened, Kai could not shake the truth he now understood fully. Neon Harbor was not a refuge. It was another desert, made of metal, smoke, and hunger instead of sand. And it would take everything from them before it gave anything back. Chapter 10. Riot Night. Beneath the glass horizon. The blackout struck just after midnight. One moment, Neon Harbor glowed with its usual bruised neon haze, screens flickering, generators humming, smog hanging thick as curtains. The next, the entire city plunged into darkness so complete it felt like a fist closing around the world. A low, catastrophic hum rolled through the ground as the power grid failed. Lights blinked out in waves across the skyline. Machinery groaned, then stuttered, then died. Distant alarms wailed before cutting abruptly to silence. In the outer zone, hundreds of eyes snapped open at once. Kai rose to his feet instantly, instincts flaring. "Mira," he whispered. "Stay close." The air shifted around them, no longer merely heavy, but charged, vibrating with the kind of tension that precedes violence. The absence of electricity revealed a deeper sound beneath the city's usual roar. Breathing, footsteps, shouting, fear. Then, like a match striking, a scream. The riot ignited fast. Without light, without drones, without the threat of surveillance, thousands of desperate migrants seized the moment. People poured into the ration stations, their silhouettes illuminated only by the red pulse of failing emergency beacons. Cries of hunger collided with the crash of breaking crates. Someone shouted, "The supply truck, open it!" A crowd surged. A guard swung a baton into the darkness. Someone else hurled a stone. Panic rippled outward like a shockwave. Fights erupted over bags of grain. A man snatched a water tank and sprinted into the night, chased by 5 others. Kai pulled Mira behind him, shielding her from the bodies slamming past. His father, frail, trembling, struggled to stand. "We need to move," Kai said. "Now." But there was nowhere safe to move toward. The outer zone was a map of chaos, every corner erupting into its own storm. And then, far above them, something exploded. A shower of sparks rained from an aerial conduit tower, illuminating the slums in harsh red for a split second. Kai's eyes widened. Behind the collapsing tower, a convoy of electric haulers, sleek, shielded, and heavily fortified, had stalled on the upper road. Their engines sputtered in the blackout. Their cargo bays, marked with corporate insignias, remained sealed only by automated locks. Automated locks that had died with the grid. Mira followed his gaze and froze. "Kai," she said, voice thin, "what are you thinking?" "The batteries inside," he said. "If they're intact, they're worth." "Too much," she whispered. "People will kill for that." "People are already killing." Another explosion shook the air. The convoy's auxiliary lights flickered, then dimmed. Migrants began noticing the trucks. Shadows shifted. A crowd peeled toward them like wolves scenting an injured animal. Kai made his choice. He lifted his father over his shoulder, grabbed Mira's wrist, and started running, not away from the trucks, but toward them. "Kai," she gasped. "If we get even one battery," he said, breath ragged, "we can leave this place. We can buy a dome. We can plant again." Mira didn't argue. She only tightened her grip and ran with him. Reaching the convoy was like entering the eye of a hurricane. Chaos roared around them, people shoving, screaming, climbing the sides of the stalled haulers, pounding on the cargo panels. The locks sparked feebly, trying to power back on. A man smashed a crowbar into a sensor panel until it broke free. Others pried open a rear latch. The first cargo bay popped open with a metallic hiss. The crowd surged. Kai pushed Mira behind him, using his bulk to carve a narrow path forward. Someone grabbed Mira's shoulder. Kai slammed his elbow into the attacker's ribs without looking back. The old man clung to Kai's neck, wheezing, terrified but silent. Inside the bay, sealed crates gleamed in the faint red glow of emergency lights. Smart batteries. High capacity. Untouched. Fortune in the shape of metal. As the crowd tore open the crates, Kai grabbed 2 batteries, small enough to carry, valuable enough to change everything. Mira grabbed a third, slipping it into her pack with quick, practiced hands. A fist swung toward her head. Kai intercepted it, shoving the attacker into a pile of boxes. "Move!" he shouted. They ran. Through the chaos. Through the smoke-like darkness. Through bodies and screams and flares of violence that lit the night in brief, hellish flashes. Behind them, the riot swallowed the convoy whole. Fire climbed the sides of the haulers. A crate toppled, spilling batteries that were trampled under desperate feet. Mira stumbled once. Kai caught her. Kai's father groaned. Mira steadied him. They moved as one. When they reached the edge of the outer zone, Kai ducked them behind a broken wall and finally allowed himself to breathe. Mira clutched the soil jar in one arm and the battery pack in the other, chest heaving, face streaked with soot. "Kai," she said softly. "What now?" He lifted the stolen battery, its surface glowing faintly blue in the dark. "This," he said, "is our way out." Mira stared at it, at the future flickering inside its metal casing. Not hope exactly, but possibility. He looked at her, at the woman who had carried a jar of dead soil across the desert, who had begged for strangers' coins, who had kept them alive with quiet endurance. "We're leaving this place," he said. "We're going home." Mira nodded, her expression unreadable, but her eyes shining with something he had not seen before. A spark. A seed. The first breath of a new beginning. Behind them, Neon Harbor burned. Ahead of them, the desert waited. But for the first time in a long time, the desert did not feel like an ending. It felt like a door. Chapter 11. Escape from the city. Beneath the glass horizon. The smoke from the riot still hung over Neon Harbor when dawn bled across the sky, thin and sickly, as if the sun itself hesitated to rise over the wreckage. Sirens wailed from deeper inside the city where drone patrols tried to smother the chaos that had erupted overnight. The outer zone was quieter now, but only because exhaustion had dulled even desperation. Kai kept Mira and his father hidden beneath the skeletal frame of a collapsed walkway until the worst of the patrols passed. The batteries were strapped tightly beneath their blankets, disguised as bundles of clothes and scrap. No one could afford to see their value. No one could afford to know what they had done. Not if they wanted to leave alive. Mira watched the patrol drones hum overhead, her shoulders tense. She held the soil jar beneath her cloak as if protecting a heart that no longer beat but still mattered. Kai crouched beside her. "We move at first shift change," he murmured. "The market opens then. Fewer eyes." She nodded, though her breathing was shallow. He wanted to tell her not to fear, but the lie tasted strange on his tongue. He feared everything, the patrols, the thieves, the city itself, an enormous, starving monster that consumed anything soft or hopeful. He feared losing what they carried. He feared failing the two people who depended on him. He feared turning back into the man who bowed before empty ration shelves. But he stood anyway. "Stay close," he said. "Don't let go." The Black Market Quarter sat beneath an underpass clogged with old pipes and fractured concrete. It wasn't a place of stalls or polite negotiation. It was a place of whispered deals, hidden knives, and currencies that changed hands faster than guilt. Kai approached a trader whose reputation was whispered among migrants, a broad man with mechanical fingers and eyes that glowed a faint amber, mod for night vision, bargaining, and detection of valuable metals. The trader lifted his head as Kai approached. "What do you want?" he said, voice rough. Kai kept his expression blank. "To sell." "What kind of scrap?" The man's gaze flicked over Kai's bundle. "If it's rickshaw parts, go left. If it's stolen rations, go right." Kai stepped closer and lowered his voice. "Battery cells." The trader went still. "What kind?" he asked, tone sharp. Kai opened the cloth just enough for the man to see the faint blue luminescence, the unmistakable signature of high-grade smart batteries. The trader's amber eyes widened. "Where did you get these?" Kai's voice did not tremble. "Does it matter?" The man studied him, studied Mira behind him, studied the fragile old man leaning on Mira's shoulder. He recognized desperation, but he also recognized audacity. "No questions," the trader said at last. If you want a clean sail, that's how we do this. But know this, men die for cells like these." "I know," Kai said. "So make the offer quick." The trader's mechanical fingers tapped against his thigh, calculating, weighing, measuring. Then he named a figure. Kai felt his breath hitch. It was more than he expected, more than he had hoped, more wealth than he had ever touched in his life. Enough to buy land. Enough to buy water. Enough to begin again. He extended his hand. The trader clasped it, sealing the deal. Within minutes, the batteries were gone from Kai's bag, replaced by a transfer card heavy with digital credit and a small pouch of physical tokens, currency accepted even in the desert. Mira let out a shaky breath she had been holding for hours. Kai placed the card in her palm. "Hold it. If we're separated, you go back to the desert. Find the old dome." Her fingers curled protectively around it. "We won't be separated," she said. But Kai had lived too long in a world that gave no such guarantees. They left the market as quietly as they had entered it. No one followed, yet. But Kai felt eyes on him everywhere. The weight of possibility pressed on his shoulders like a second sun. The sooner they left the city, the better. By late afternoon they reached the southern transit bridge, half-broken, sand-choked, barely functional. Old cargo lifts still traveled this route, carrying scrap between the outskirts and the empty lands beyond. Kai approached the operator, an old woman with wiring braided through her hair. "3 seats," he said. "Where to?" she rasped. "Out," he said. "Past the city line." She smirked. "Everyone's going out. City's bleeding bodies like a slit throat." Kai didn't respond. She named her price. Kai paid it without protest. The cargo lift groaned to life, rattling as it crawled across the rusted tracks. Mira sat across from Kai, her knees drawn close, the soil jar hidden beneath her arms. The old man leaned against Kai, breathing shallow but steady. As the city receded behind them, its skyscrapers swallowed by smoke and distance, Mira turned her face toward the desert. It looked different now, less like a grave and more like a horizon. Harsh, yes. Unforgiving. But open. Wide. Honest. "What will we do when we reach home?" she asked. Kai exhaled, the answer rising without hesitation. "We plant," he said. Mira's eyes softened. "And we rebuild," he added. "And we live," she finished quietly. He looked at her, at the faint grit smudged along her cheek, at the careful strength in her posture, at the soil jar she refused to abandon. "Yes," he said. "We live." The lift jerked forward, breaking into the free expanse beyond Neon Harbor's reach. Behind them, the city crackled and moaned, devouring itself in darkness. Ahead of them, the desert stretched, waiting, fierce, alive. For the first time in many weeks, Kai let his shoulders loosen. They were going home. Chapter 12. The First Dome. Beneath the glass horizon. The desert greeted them with an unexpected mercy. After the choking fumes of Neon Harbor, the air out here felt cleaner, even warm with truth instead of poison. The wind carried sand, yes, but it also carried silence, and silence was something Kai had begun to crave. The old roads back to the Sunrise Corridor were half buried, but familiar. The dunes rolled like frozen waves under a pale, cloudless sky. Kai adjusted his father's weight on his back and kept walking. Mira moved beside him, lighter on her feet than she had been in weeks. Out here, she no longer looked like a woman shrinking into survival. She looked like a woman remembering who she was. By the second day, the settlement where they once lived finally emerged from the emptiness, a cluster of half-collapsed huts and abandoned framework, wind-whittled to their bones. Kai paused. Everything they had once known was gone. Mira stood beside him, her expression unreadable, but her grip on the soil jar tightened. "We don't stay here," she said softly. "We go where the land is still breathing." Kai nodded. He knew exactly where that was. The man who owned the old living soil dome was waiting outside it, sitting on an overturned crate with his elbows on his knees and defeat etched deep into the lines of his sun-scorched face. He looked up as Kai approached. "Kai Ren," he said, squinting. "I thought the riots took you. Or the desert." "Neither," Kai replied. "But I heard you're selling." The man spat into the sand. "Selling? I'm begging someone to take it before the wind skins it down to the anchors. The water lines are failing. Cooling system too. I've lost 3 harvests. I'm ruined." Kai glanced at Mira. She stepped past him, approaching the dome's cracked entrance. Though battered, though patched with uneven plates of metal and old glass, the structure still stood. The dome's curvature caught the light in a way that made something stir in Kai's chest, something like the promise of breath after drowning. "I'll take it," Kai said. The man blinked at him, without even checking inside. "I know what it is," Kai said, "and what it can be." The man snorted. "Then you're a fool, or you've got more hope than sense." Kai pulled the trader's credit card from his pack. "Hope's cheaper than land." The man looked at the card, then at Kai's face, and realized the truth. Kai wasn't haggling. Kai wasn't waiting. Kai was a man who had walked through scarcity, fire, and riot, and had come back with enough determination to bargain with the horizon itself. The man shook his head, defeated. "Fine. She's yours." As he walked away, he muttered, "Maybe the dome will listen to someone new." Inside, the air was thin but not dead. A wide stretch of soil lay beneath the translucent panels, brown-grey, uneven, thirsty. Water pipes ran through the ground like old veins, some cracked, some intact. A few surviving plants lay collapsed in the corners, limp but not completely lifeless. Mira stepped inside as if entering a sacred place. Kai watched her expression change, her breath catching, her eyes softening, her posture easing in a way he had not seen since their early days in the old dome. She knelt immediately, pressing her palm to the soil, her fingers sinking into the dry top layer. "This land is hurting," she murmured. "Can you save it?" Kai asked. Her eyes lifted to his. There was no hesitation. "Yes." She set the soil jar down gently beside her, then began clearing debris, moving with purposeful grace. She tore away dead roots, broke apart hardened clumps, tested the moisture level with familiar skill. Kai watched in silence as she worked. Even exhausted, even thin from hunger and long travel, she moved like someone who belonged to Earth more than to people. He joined her, repairing what he could, tightening the cracked water lines, patching broken panels, sealing leaks with resin from an old toolkit he'd scavenged years ago. They worked until dusk seeped through the dome, turning the inside golden. Only then did Mira bring out the soil jar. She held it with both hands, as if holding a child. Kai swallowed. "Mira, you don't have to use it." She shook her head. "The soil must wake. If it sleeps too long, it forgets life." She unwrapped the jar and set it in the center of the dome. The desert wind howled faintly outside, but inside everything went still, waiting. Mira dug a small hollow in the dome soil and carefully poured half the contents of the jar into it. Dark loam spilled like ink across sand, spreading rich against the pale dryness. Kai watched, breath tight, heart beating too hard. Mira mixed the living soil with the dead, folding it gently, slowly, whispering something as she worked. Not words. Not prayer. A hum, a soft vibration that Kai had heard once before, in the first dome they repaired together. Life, calling life. She watered it with the last cup of ration water they carried. The soil darkened, deepened, breathed. Mira stood, wiping her hands on her tunic. "It will live," she said quietly. "Tomorrow, we begin planting." Kai looked around the dome, battered, broken, half-ruined, and felt something unfurl inside him, something he had not felt since before the flare. Possibility. Not a dream. Not a wish. A beginning. Outside, the desert whispered and roared. Inside, beneath cracked glass and trembling beams, a patch of earth had been reborn. And Kai knew, with absolute certainty, that whatever life they built next would root itself here. With Mira's hands. With his labor. With the soil that had survived every death the world had offered. They had come home. Chapter 13. Prosperity begins. Beneath the glass horizon. Morning came gently to the dome, not with heat or wind, but with a soft, warm glow filtering through the patched panels overhead. The first thing Kai smelled was the earth. Real earth. Not dust. Not dried substrate. Not the artificial scent of reclaimed growth medium. Living soil. He sat up slowly, muscles still aching from days of travel and nights of tension. Mira was already awake, kneeling in the center of the dome where they had mixed the soil. She was turning it again, carefully, methodically, her hands sinking into the ground as if she were reading Braille written in the dirt. Kai approached quietly. "How is it?" Mira looked up, her cheeks brushed with the faintest smear of soil. "It's ready." Her voice held a quiet certainty he had learned to trust more than any machine reading. Together they planted. They used the remaining seeds, the hardy microcrop variety that could root in even damaged soil, and lined them in precise rows along the central tray. Mira pressed each seed with a gesture so gentle and deliberate that Kai found himself slowing his own movements to match hers. When they finished, Mira fetched the filtered water line Kai had repaired the night before. A thin trickle came through at first, weak but steady. She cupped her hand beneath it, wetting her fingers, and let droplets fall over the seeds. The soil darkened, softened, accepted the offering. She stood back, exhaling. "It will grow quickly," she said. "Healthy soil remembers how to give life." Kai watched the small patch where they had poured Mira's precious jar of earth. It seemed darker than the rest, almost warm, like a beating heart beneath the surface. By the second week, the sprouts emerged. Small, pale green shoots pushing through the soil like whispers of hope. Mira checked them each morning, her expression softening in ways Kai rarely saw. She spoke to them with her hands, turning the soil, adjusting the shade panels Kai had rigged with leftover glass and metal sheets. At night, she hummed, soft, low, rhythmic. Kai didn't know if the plants responded to the sound or if he only imagined they stood straighter in the mornings, but he believed it nonetheless. The dome began to breathe again. By the third week, the sprouts reached Kai's knees. By the fourth, they were strong, thick-stemmed plants crowned with clusters of edible pods. A faint scent of green filled the air, mingling with the warmth of the soil. The dome no longer felt like a ruin. It felt alive. And the neighbors noticed. Kai stood outside the dome one evening, patching a seam in the outer shell, when a shadow approached from the dunes. It was Sifu, the man who had sold him the dome. The same man who had spat into the sand and given up on this land weeks earlier. He stared through the translucent panel, eyes narrowing in disbelief. "How?" he breathed. "How in the sun's name did you manage that?" Kai's jaw tightened. "Work." But Sifu wasn't looking at Kai. His gaze was fixed on Mira as she moved between the rows inside, adjusting drainage, testing humidity, brushing her fingertips lightly over the leaves. "Work," Safu repeated, hollow. "Or a miracle?" Kai didn't respond. Safu stepped closer. "Listen, Ren. If you ever want to sell—" "I don't," Kai said sharply. Safu lifted his hands. "Fine. Fine. Just think on it." He left with a bitter shake of his head. Kai watched him disappear, then looked back at Mira through the dome wall. She was kneeling beside the central row, the row grown from the soil jar, her face serene, her hand steady. She worked the earth with the same devotion other people gave to prayer. Kai felt something swell in him. Not pride. Not possession. Gratitude. By the 5th week, the harvest was ready. Kai and Mira gathered the crops into woven bags Mira had crafted from old mesh filters. The plants were thick, heavy with pods, enough for days of meals, enough to store for weeks, enough to sell. For the first time in months, their hut filled with the scent of real food cooking on the stove, rich, green, nourishing. The old man cried quietly as he ate, unable to remember the taste of anything that wasn't stale or rationed. By the 6th week, other people began to ask. First the nearby families, then distant travelers crossing the corridor. They came seeking food, or work, or a share of the bounty. Kai sold small bundles, modest, fair. Enough to earn respect. Enough to build reputation. Enough to gather the first trickle of credits. When the 7th week came, he hired 2 workers, brothers, strong and quiet, paying them in food, water, and a promise of wages once the next harvest came. The dome expanded, not in size, but in spirit. What had been abandoned now thrived. What had been dying now fed others. What had been dust now grew green. Kai woke each morning before sunrise and walked through the dome, breathing in the scent of new life. Prosperity did not feel like wealth. It felt like air. He found Mira one afternoon near the central patch, her hand resting lightly on the soil jar, now half empty but still revered. "You saved this place," he said. She shook her head. The soil saved itself. It just needed someone to listen. Kai looked at her, really looked at her, the woman who had crossed deserts, begged in slums, rebuilt broken land with nothing but her hands and her quiet strength. "No," he said. "You listened." Mira lowered her gaze, her cheeks faintly warm. But she didn't disagree. And in the dome around them, the green leaves rustled softly, as if agreeing for her. Chapter 14. Moorland. Beneath the glass horizon. The desert had begun to whisper about Kai Ren. Whispers moved differently here than in Neon Harbor. There were no neon signs, no broadcast screens, no surveillance drones to carry news. Instead, the wind itself seemed to carry the stories. Small, quiet tales told between farmers, traders, wanderers, and the last stubborn souls who still believed the land could be tamed with bare hands. They spoke of a ruined dome that grew green again. They spoke of a young man who coaxed life from dead soil. They spoke, most often, of the silent woman with dark eyes who knew how to listen to the earth. By the 2nd month, travelers began arriving in 2s and 3s, asking cautious questions. Some came seeking work. Some came seeking food. Some came hoping for something more precious, a chance at survival. Kai sold what he could spare, but he always set aside enough to feed those who worked with him. Still, there were far more people in need than one small dome could sustain. And Kai's mind, sharpened by scarcity, ambition, and the memory of Neon Harbor's crushing hunger, began to turn toward something larger. He found the first abandoned dome on the eastern dunes. Once, it had been a thriving biome farm. He could tell by the structural shape, the number of water lines, the ruined filtration vents. But the roof had buckled under last year's sandstorms, and the soil inside was pale, drained of life. The owner, a gaunt woman with sun-cracked lips and eyes as sharp as broken glass, stood beside the wreckage when Kai approached. "You looking to buy?" she rasped. Kai studied the dome. "Depends." "On what?" "Whether it can still breathe." She barked a brittle laugh. "Breathe? It's dead. Like everything else out here." Mira stepped forward then, kneeling at the threshold of the dome. She pressed her fingers against the dust, lifted it, felt the grain. Kai watched her expression. He trusted that subtle shift in her eyes more than any instrument. "It's not dead," Mira said quietly. "Just starved." The woman scoffed. "You won't bring it back." Kai's voice remained steady. "I brought one back already." The woman stared at him, weighing the truth of that. Hope flickered behind her skepticism, small and stubborn. He named a price, fair but low, what little he could offer without risking the dome they already had. The woman thought for a long moment, lips trembling. "Take it," she whispered. Her shoulders sagged with relief and defeat. The second dome came only a week later. Word had traveled. A man named Arquin, his face carved by the sun into granite, sought Kai out. He led Kai and Mira to his shattered dome, a structure leaning so heavily to one side that it looked moments away from collapse. Inside, rows of dead crops lay like brittle paper. Arquin's voice cracked. "I can't save it. My sons are gone. My wife died last season. I've got nothing left but this failure. If you'll take it, if you'll give me enough to leave the corridor, I'll sign it over." Kai felt a pull in his chest. Not pity. Recognition. He knew what it was to lose a future. He knew what it was to stare at the ground and see only emptiness. He knew what it was to reach for something and find only air. He bought the dome. Arquin cried, not from sadness, but from the strange freedom of letting go of suffering too heavy to carry. By the end of the third month, Kai owned 4 domes. They were not impressive. Not new. Not shining miracles of technology. They were dented, cracked, half-ruined husks scattered across the corridor. But Mira saw their bones. Kai saw their potential. And the desert, patient, unyielding, seemed to listen. At dawn one morning, Kai climbed a dune overlooking all 4 domes. The wind whipped across his face. The sun was low and amber, painting the cracked structures in molten light. Below, Mira inspected the water reclamation in one dome while 2 hired workers reinforced a structural seam on another. The sound of metal tools echoed through the valley like quiet percussion. Life, fragile, hard-won life, echoed with it. Kai folded his arms and breathed deeply. This land was not just surviving. It was recovering. And he would help it recover further. Not because he craved status. Not because he wanted to be the man the desert whispered about. Not because he sought wealth for its own sake. But because he had walked through famine, riot, and ash, and understood something the cities never would. When soil breathes, people breathe. He whispered into the wind, 4 domes isn't enough. The wind carried his words into the rising sun. Behind him, Mira climbed the dune. She didn't ask what he was thinking, she already knew. She stood beside him, her shoulder brushing his arm. "How many?" she asked. Kai exhaled slowly. "As many as the land will give," he said. Mira nodded, eyes on the horizon. "Then let's begin." In that moment, beneath the endless sky, with the domes stretched like dim stars across the desert floor, Kai felt the unmistakable surge of something larger than survival. Purpose. Real purpose. It glowed within him like a second sun. Bright, steady, relentless. Chapter 15. A son's education. Beneath the glass horizon. Joran was 5 years old when Kai realized his son did not belong to the desert. Not in the way Kai did. Not in the way Mira did. Not in the way the domes needed. The child was small, sharp-eyed, curious in a way that felt too large for their world. He watched everything: machines, stars, screens, faces, gestures, with a seriousness that felt older than his years. When other children dug trenches in the sand or chased wind-blown scraps of cloth, Joran sat beside Mira, studying how she mixed soil with careful precision. But while the others forgot and ran away, Joran remembered. He remembered the names of tools Kai barely understood. He remembered where Mira buried nutrient strips weeks earlier. He remembered how much water each crop row needed. Yet he touched nothing. He observed. Always observed. By the time the domes were thriving again, a steady flow of traders began passing through the sunrise corridor. Among them were educators, traveling tutors who lived off the fees of landowners seeking better futures for their children. One such tutor arrived at dusk, stepping off a transport crawler like a pale ghost in sun-shielding robes. She carried a briefcase and spoke in clipped, formal tones. Her eyes, icy, assessing, lingered on Joran. "This boy learns quickly," she told Kai after a short interview. "Too quickly for a place like this." Kai stiffened. "This land made us. It will make him." The tutor tilted her head. "Or it will limit him." The word struck deeper than Kai expected. Limit him. Kai had clawed his way through limits all his life, limits of water, food, opportunity, dignity. He had broken his body and rebuilt his world to escape limits. Was he now building them around his own son? Mira sat quietly through the discussion, her hands folded in her lap, her face unreadable. But Kai knew she heard every word. When the tutor stepped outside to give them privacy, Kai turned to Mira. "You think he needs this?" he asked. Mira looked toward the domes, glowing faintly in the deepening dusk, then at Joran, who stood alone near the dune, tracing patterns in the sand with a stick. "No," she said softly. "He wants it." Kai followed her gaze. Joran's small frame seemed fragile against the vastness of the desert, as if the sand might swallow him whole. "He was not born for the land," Mira continued. "He was born from it. That is not the same." Kai didn't fully understand, but he trusted her insight the way he trusted the soil's breath. Joran began lessons the next day. The tutor set up a portable screen inside Dome 2, teaching him mathematics, planetary history, mechanical engineering basics, city dialects, subjects Kai had never studied, subjects Mira only recognized from her time in the greenhouse estates. Joran absorbed everything with fierce hunger, his small face tight with concentration. He corrected the tutor once, quietly, politely, after noticing an error in her schematic. The tutor blinked at him, then crossed out the line without protest. Kai watched from the doorway, arms folded. Joran looked so small at the desk, so young, so unbound by what his parents had survived. "He's not like us," Kai muttered. Mira stood beside him. "He is exactly like us," she said. "He works. He learns. He endures." Kai shook his head. "He doesn't love the land." "He respects it," Mira corrected. "But his path leads somewhere beyond it." Kai didn't know whether to be proud or afraid. Weeks passed. Joran grew sharper, faster, hungrier for knowledge. He began asking Kai why the domes were built the way they were, why solar grids failed, why some families fled and others stayed. He asked about the cities with lights that touched the sky. Kai answered what he could. Mira answered the rest. But some questions belonged to worlds neither of them understood. And so, the tutor returned with a proposition. "There's an academy," she said, "in the northern corridor. Scholarship tracks for children like him. He would learn more there in a year than he can learn here in 5. Mira bowed her head. "It is a good opportunity." Kai felt something cold settle in his stomach. "If he leaves," he said quietly, "he may not return." Mira met his eyes. "And if he stays," she whispered, "he may never become more than what this land already asks of us." Kai looked at his son, studying the lines of a broken filtration map, brow furrowed. So young, yet so far from needing Kai's hand to guide him. Kai knelt beside him. "Joran," he said, "do you want to learn in a place far from here?" Joran didn't hesitate. "Yes." Not cruelly. Not with rejection. Simply with clarity. Kai swallowed. That night, after Joran fell asleep, Kai stood outside the dome in the dark, staring at the stars. He felt the desert wind brush against him like a question he didn't want to answer. Mira approached quietly. "You're doing what a father must do," she said. Kai's voice came low and rough. "He's my successor." Mira laid her hand gently against his arm. "He is your son," she said. "Let him choose what he becomes." Kai closed his eyes. He knew she was right. He hated that she was right. And he feared, deeply, instinctively, that the more Joran learned, the further he would drift from the soil that had created him. 2 weeks later, Kai watched his son climb into the transport crawler, carrying a small bag of clothes and the slate tablet the tutor had given him. Joran looked through the window, eyes searching for Mira first, then for Kai. Kai raised his hand. Joran raised his in return. A moment, a thread, connected them. Then the crawler pulled away, rolling into the dunes until it became a black dot swallowed by the horizon. Mira stood beside Kai, silent. The desert wind shifted. Kai whispered, "I hope he comes back." Mira said nothing, because she knew better than to make promises the world wouldn't keep.